Hey, everybody, we're all gonna get late.
What do you get when you take the brightest comic stars of a generation?
We have a pond in the back. We have a pool and a pond. A pond would be good for you.
Inexperienced kids. And Hollywood icons.
Do you know what golfers can do to a golf course?
Enough drugs and alcohol to make a rock band blush.
If you say you remember Caddyshack, you probably weren't there.
Hey, Cary Grant, do you want to get high?
Wait a minute. I've only got a little.
Okay.
Then split, okay, Terry?
You either became part of the madness or you got swept away with it.
And locked them all on a Florida golf course for 3 months.
There was an announcement saying, if you want to party, just leave your door open.
It was 1979. What do you think's going to happen?
Chaos. And Caddyshack.
I developed a mantra on Caddyshack, which was, it's not my money. If the whole thing blew away, well, it's not my fault.
It was kamikaze filmmaking at its best.
It was a golf-ellipse now.
In the 30-plus years since its release, Caddyshack has become one of the most beloved comedies of all time.
Be the ball, Danny. You're not being the ball, Danny.
Well, it's kind of difficult with you talking like that.
Okay, I'm not talking.
I'm Michael O'Keefe, and I played Danny Noonan in the film Caddyshack. Do not call me Noonan if you see me on the street.
Can't pay you, Lou has to.
I ain't gonna pay no 50 cents for no Coke. My name is Scott Columbi, and I was Tony D'Annunzio in Caddyshack.
My name is Harold Ramis, and I was co-writer and director of Caddyshack.
I think Harold wasn't even sure which end of the lens to look through, to tell you the truth.
It was a little disconcerting the first day when I came onto the set, and Harold was looking in the lens towards the eyepiece, thinking that you could see the scene through the eyepiece.
Not true.
My name is Cindy Morgan, and I played Lacey Underall in Caddyshack. You want to tie me up with some of your ties? Tie?
My name is John Barman, and I was Spalding in Caddyshack. I want a hamburger, no, a cheeseburger.
I want a hot dog. I want a milkshake. I want potato chips. You'll get nothing and like it.
And like the movie's retinue of rabid fans, the cast and crew have their favorite scenes too.
Some of the stuff is so funny. People still say, you got a pool? I have a pond. Pond would be good for you.
My favorite scene in Caddyshack could be the water ballet.
It had nothing to do with the movie, but we just thought it would be funny.
Some of us nearly drowned during the water ballet.
Favorite scene is, I gotta think it's the stuff with the bishop.
Harry Wilcoxon, he'd been in silent movies.
Rat farts. I mean, rat farts. Did Harold Ramis write that?
These guys made golf cool. I mean, golf was not cool.
But the story behind the making of Caddyshack is wilder than the movie itself. National Lampoon alumni Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny had just scored a big hit with Animal House.
It kind of legitimized us.
For their next project, they teamed up with Brian Doyle Murray to pen another tale of the slobs versus the snobs, this time set at a country club.
It was Animal House on a golf course.
The studio was delighted to be working with the guys that made Animal House. So the object here was to do it all over again, but with the gopher.
When the cast and crew assembled on a Florida golf course called Rolling Hills in September of 1979, things got out of hand quickly.
Are you seriously asking me if there was one night where we got crazy in the making of Caddyshack?
50% actors, 50% crew, and then some people we didn't know who the hell they were.
But most people were so loaded they don't remember.
My name is Mark, and I played Terry the Hippie in Caddyshack.
This is me in the shot, 1979. This is the call sheet for shooting that day, and 7:45 a.m., which was great because I was still up.
If I remembered anything about the late 70s, I could probably tell you, but it's gone.
It was very difficult for me to watch Caddyshack for a long time without being heavily sedated.
People had so much fun on that movie, and it kind of spoiled me because I thought, oh boy, if this is what filmmaking is like, this is great. It's like having a party every day with all these great, talented people and someone else paying for it.
But studio head Mike Medavoy didn't quite see it that way.
We got a call from Mike Medavoy, who was concerned that there was too much drugs on the set.
Caddyshack was like a daycare center with no babysitters.
But out of the chaos emerged some of the most memorable moments in film comedy.
This is the worst looking hat I ever saw. Well, you buy a hat like this, I'll bet you get a free bowl of soup, huh? Oh, it looks good on you, though.
Hot off 7 award-winning seasons as arrogant anchorman Ted Baxter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Ted Knight plays Judge Smales, the pompous, two-faced titular head of Bushwood Country Club.
I've got a little poem that I'd like to read in honor of this occasion, if I may. Spaulding, get your foot off the boat.
But the nonstop partying and on-set antics didn't go over well with the veteran actor. Rodney Dangerfield, on the other hand, couldn't get enough.
Rodney liked to party.
Caddyshack was the legendary comedian's first Hollywood film, and he burst on the scene like a twitching, bug-eyed bull in a china shop.
I think this place is restricted, Wang, so don't tell me you're Jewish. Okay, fine.
Moving through the mayhem with zen-like calm is millionaire playboy and golf phenom Ty Webb.
My uncle says you got a screw loose.
Oh, yeah? Your uncle molests collies.
The role of Ty Webb was written with Chevy Chase in mind, one of the hottest stars in Hollywood at the time.
Chevy was the perfect Ty Webb. Everything we'd written was kind of aimed at him.
See your future. Be your future. Make it.
And then there was Bill Murray, the shell-shocked assistant greenskeeper, Carl Spackler.
Bill was kind of a wild guy. You kind of didn't know what Bill was going to do.
At one point, we stopped, and I said, is there any way you could just go a little easier with the pitchfork because it's really starting to hurt? And he goes, quit whining, Burkrot.
By then, Bill and Chevy had become sworn enemies.
When Chevy came back to host Saturday Night, there'd been an actual physical scuffle.
But Bill's true enemy was a furry brown puppet.
The gopher's my best friend now. We sell him at concerts.
It kind of let everyone off the hook by saying, all right, this film is really silly. There's an animated dancing gopher in the opening of this film. What could go wrong after that? I mean...
What could go wrong? Plenty. Drug-fueled debauchery, poolside pandemonium, even a surprise hurricane. But somehow, out of the chaos came a comedy classic. When Animal House was released in 1978, no one expected it to be such a huge hit on a budget of only $3 million. It did over $140 million at the box office. The guys who made it were now red hot in Hollywood, and the pressure was on.
It raised expectations that everything we did would be as successful as Animal House, and that's dangerous.
With the success of Animal House, Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny formed a production company to develop and pitch new movie projects.
I wanted to direct the next thing that I wrote, and I pitched a couple of movies to John Peters and Orion that they didn't like. One was a very dark social comedy about the American Nazi Party marching in Skokie, Illinois. And the other was a revisionist Marxist Western.
I went, nah, I don't think that's a good idea.
And I said, thank you very much, and that was the end of that meeting.
Around that same time, Doug Kenny and Brian Doyle Murray had been kicking around an idea for a movie set at a country club.
Brian had been a caddy at a couple of golf courses in the Chicago suburbs. I think it was Indian Hill and Winnetka, and they'd played golf all their teen years.
Harold and Brian Doyle Murray had met at Chicago's famed Second City. After leaving Second City, Brian and Harold had gone on to work for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, where they met Doug Kenny.
Doug had been the assistant tennis pro and worked in the pro shop at a club.
He had been the kid who was
of the working class, and yet he had to be with the kids of social standing. And there was a lot of leftover anger yet to be expressed about that.
If everyone else was wearing jeans and T-shirts, he'd be in a tuxedo. If everyone else was formally dressed, he'd be the guy in the ripped jeans and the T-shirt.
Harvard-educated Doug Kenny was one of the founders of National Lampoon, which in the 1970s had revolutionized American comedy, with writers like Michael O'Donoghue and P.J. O'Rourke, and performers like John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, and Harold Ramis.
He'd been one of the three guys who took the Harvard Lampoon and went national with it, and made a lot of money really quick.
After being turned down on the Nazi idea, Ramis and Doug went back to Orion with the country club idea.
Harold's agents called me a few days later, and they had a new idea that they wanted to pitch. So, pitch Caddyshack. And I said, that sounds great.
Medavoy gave them the go-ahead. And to serve as executive producer, he brought in John Peters.
I didn't even like golf, but I liked blowing up the golf course.
Harold Ramis, Doug Kenny, and Brian Doyle Murray locked themselves in a room and began writing.
They had a small, nondescript office. It wasn't glamorous. It was the three of them hammering it out on yellow legal pads.
There was a lot of smoke in the writer's room.
We used kind of the same approach that we'd used on Animal House. Doug and I and Brian would sit down and kind of recall everything we could about our own experience of country clubs, everything we'd ever heard about country clubs, everything that they represented in American life, everything about golf.
Is there a special thrill in swinging a club and hitting a ball and trying to make it go where you want it to?
The original story had much more to do with the caddies.
It was going to be all about the caddies the way Animal House was about the animals. Oh, God, I did air quotes. Just shoot me.
The caddies probably got cut the most, and they weren't in any position to complain about it.
I was pissed. I was one of the stars that became replaced by a gopher. How would you feel?
Motor mouth. We've got about 25 loopers, all primed and ready to be assigned their prospective loops by looper leader Lou Loomis. And gee, they're an excited bunch of caddies. Wow, hard to believe that was cut.
As the story began coming together, one caddy stood out. He was based on Brian Doyle Murray's older brother, Ed.
My brother, Ed, he won the caddy scholarship in real life.
In fact, the whole Murray family had a hand in the story.
The lumberyard references in the opening scene, my dad was vice president of J.J. Varney Lumber Company. And what that meant to me was we got free yardsticks that were real good for spanking.
We wanted a big Irish Catholic family to open the film because that was the Murray brothers' story.
Remember, the movie starts off with Danny in his big house with the big family.
The Murrays were a very big Irish Catholic family.
There were 6 Murray brothers and 3 sisters.
9 kids, 2 parents, and 2 bathrooms. Mornings were not quiet.
There's about 62 Murray brothers.
I had a big family, 9 kids, and that was sort of a show every night, you know. There was, you know, a lot of competition, line acts. It was like old vaudeville. Everybody had their own shtick.
I love the Murray brothers. I love them all. They are so darn much fun. They really are fun.
In fact, I think they were all Murrays. Ted Knight was really a Murray. Chevy Chase was a Murray. Rodney Danger Murray.
And definitely not, least of all,
Bill really was a groundskeeper.
Bill was literally selling hot dogs on the 9th hole.
I was a caddy. I was a greenskeeper. I had a hot dog stand on a golf course.
Many of the scenes that went into the script were based on things that happened in real life.
I think I'd only completed 2 rounds of golf my whole life. And in one of them was on a 9-hole public golf course, and I actually struck a person with a golf ball on the next fairway. We use that in the movie, in fact. Ted Knight gets hit in the crotch with a golf ball, and that's what I did that day with this other guy.
4! I'll find you. Oh! I should have yelled 2.
The pool scene, it happened. Somebody left. It wasn't a baby Ruth in the pool.
And the pool emptied really quickly.
After compiling all their notes, they began to assemble the first draft of a script.
Eventually, you make enough notes and threads start to emerge. Doug had kind of clarified the movie. He called it a Bildungsroman, which is a great word from freshman English. It means a coming-of-age story.
But the Bildungsroman they finally emerged with was way too long for a movie script.
The script originally was 250 pages, and we had to get the script down to 115 pages.
I remember vividly because I had to Xerox it, and I was terrible at Xeroxing, so I remember being on my knees, like, collating scripts.
Mark Canton was brought in by John Peters to help wrestle it down to size.
He basically threw the screenplay in my lap and said, you got to help get this down to a makeable page count, because it was sort of like Titanic at that point.
I have the original ending right here. It was going to be Danny in the airport with his family. It was all about Danny's story, based on the Murray family. And by the end of the movie, that's gone. Where'd they go? Who knows? Flight number 42 for Omaha, Nebraska, now boarding at gate 46.
Once the script was down to a more reasonable length, it was submitted to the studio.
You know, like every script, it's always lots of versions of it. And even then, I think we all thought we had a really funny movie.
That didn't mean the studio was prepared to make it, though.
Golf is boring. How can you make a movie about golf is boring? Golf is boring. I heard golf is boring a million times. So what's you know? So that was the whole thing was you know, an obstacle.
People get nervous. It wasn't a sequel. It was untested.
Not only that, Ramis and Kenny were insisting on directing and producing the film themselves.
The film technically had a first-time director and a first-time producer. And in Hollywood lore, that's kind of a recipe for problems.
But the studio was eager to reach the huge youth market the two National Lampoon alum had tapped into with Animal House. So they went ahead with the project, but not without hedging their bet.
I will tell you something that Harold Ramis doesn't know. The executive producer turned to me and said, make a list of the top 10 directors that can take this film over so that we can make a snap decision if I need to replace him.
With the Caddyshack script complete, producer Doug Kenny and director Harold Ramis turned their attention to casting. They were given one directive by the studio: no star, no movie.
Because we were not a very small budget, we needed a star.
Fortunately, Harold and Doug had just the star in mind: Doug's friend, Chevy Chase.
Doug really admired Chevy. He virtually idolized Chevy in a certain way. And Chevy was the perfect Ty Webb. Everything we'd written was kind of aimed at him.
Saturday Night Live had made Chevy a big TV star. And he'd just scored a huge hit at the box office with Goldie Hawn in Foul Play.
So Chevy came on board, and that was it. Then when we were rolling.
Once word got out that casting had begun, there was no shortage of people who wanted to audition.
Everybody wanted to be in this movie because Animal House had been such a huge hit.
At the top of the casting to-do list was the part of Danny Noonan, who, in the original script, was in almost every scene. Their first choice was Mickey Rourke.
I just brought in anybody that I thought looked kind of young Irish Catholic, everyman kind of kid.
He was not the Mickey Rourke we know today. He was starting out, and a very, really good actor, like surprisingly real.
Maybe a little too real.
We wondered if he could be broadly funny, because there's something about playing comedy that doesn't always work for real method actors.
Orion suggested someone who had just starred in a movie for them, a young actor named Michael O'Keefe.
He'd already been in The Great Santini with Robert Duvall, and he was wonderful in the movie.
Clearly, they demonstrated a lack of discerning taste.
If you can hold half of the screen opposite Robert Duvall, then you're doing a really good job for a young guy. So I knew that he had the charisma and the power to be the central character in this film.
They decided to offer O'Keefe the part.
I was thrilled because I knew who Doug was from National Lampoon magazine. I was a big fan of that since high school.
Cindy Morgan was a disc jockey in Chicago before moving to Hollywood to pursue acting. When she came in to read for the part of Lacey Underall, everyone was impressed.
I just remember Cindy coming in and being very good and very beautiful.
I do remember she looked pretty good.
I was kind of like, damn, who's that? That's Cindy Morgan. Whoa. All the guys be like this, and then Cindy come on set and be like, hey, Cindy, how you doing? Good to see you.
Hello, Cindy.
I play a kooky character, but this is the real me.
Totally cool over here. I always stand like this.
And then she'd leave and everybody would let their gut hang out again.
Is she gone?
I saw Lacey as a woman who enjoyed life and enjoyed sex and kind of enjoyed having fun with people a little bit. And a woman knows how to make a man sweat. You just look him in the eye. You want to tie me up with some of your ties? Tie? When I read with Doug Kenny, and I saw the sweat trickling down the side of his face, I knew I had the job.
Danny's other love interest is Maggie O'Hooligan, an Irish exchange student working at Bushwood for the summer.
The girls who were hired to work at the Indian Hill Country Club, which was kind of the model for Bushwood, were all recruited by an employment service from Ireland.
When a young catty mind wanders, it often turns to Irish girls.
Sarah Holcomb had starred in Animal House as the underage daughter of Mayor Carmine DePasto.
Sarah was so lovely in Animal House, we really wanted to use her again.
The part called for Sarah to have a thick Irish accent.
People saw the movie and go, what the hell? Why does she have that accent? But to us, it made a lot of sense because we were kind of being faithful to the truth.
She's been plucked more times than the Rose of Tralee.
Biggest whore on Fifth Avenue, I'm told. Like, wow.
The Irish people of the world will decide how good that accent was.
We're takes for nothing!
Danny Noonan's nemesis in the film is Tony D'Annunzio, a tough, wisecracking kid from the wrong side of the tracks.
I ain't gonna pay no 50 cents for no Coke.
This was a more tougher ethnic kid, so a lot of kids came in and they were doing, Serpico or something, but Scott actually knew that it was a comedy.
I was doing a character on One Day at a Time, and I think there were similarities in that. And I had the hair. I had that football helmet hair.
I don't know if you knew this or not. He was 43 years old when we made Caddyshack, and he was playing like an 18-year-old kid. I mean, that's how good-looking and how together he was.
The part of Tony's brother, Angie, went to theater student Peter Burkrot.
I was working at the Berkshire Theater Festival in Stockbridge. I was a, slave labor. It was a glorified apprentice.
A few weeks later, he got a call from a casting agent.
She said, the role is Angie. It shoots, blah, blah. And I said, wait. I said, this is definite? And she says, oh, yes, this is an offer. I said, I accept! And I just, at that point, pretty much went out into the field and did the victory dance.
John Barman didn't even know he was being considered for a role in Caddyshack. He was just trying to get a meeting with the agent of a friend.
And she was, the classic busy New York agent. Yeah, nice to meet you. All right, get lost. So about 3 weeks later, the agent calls and says, is that friend of yours still in town? Actually, she said, we'll call it, is that heavy-set friend of yours in town? I've always been large.
TV actor Ted Knight was eager for a lead role in a film, and the part of Judge Smales was perfect for him.
His timing was impeccable. He really got the movie and got the character.
I was a huge fan of the Mary Tyler Moore Show when I was a teenager.
While casting Ted Knight may have been a no-brainer, casting Rodney Dangerfield was a big risk.
Rodney Dangerfield was someone that we always loved and would see on the Johnny Carson show. He had never been in a movie.
With Rodney, it was a total crapshoot. I don't think, anyone knew what they were going to get.
The tale of his audition is something of legend.
It was a different time. It was a different period in the culture of America.
Came onto the lot in a big black limousine in a wrong black trench coat.
He was wearing remember those leisure suits, those Miami polyester leisure suits?
And he came into my office and he sat down, undid his tie, undid his pants.
And then he goes like this. Let's eat.
And that's how I met Rodney Dangerfield. That was his action and his first trip to Hollywood.
We were thinking it was Don Rickles for a long time. But at that time, Rodney Dangerfield was on an amazing run of successful Tonight Show appearances with Johnny Carson. Everything he did just killed. Audience was hysterical. Carson would fall out of his chair laughing.
Last week I told my doctor I want a vasectomy. He said, with a face like mine, I don't need one.
And Doug looked at me and said, I think Rodney's the guy.
I tell you, I know I'm ugly. Well, while the guy was mugging me, he took off his mask and made me wear it.
Like Rodney, his sidekick Wang had never been in a Hollywood movie before either. Or since.
Hey, Wang, what's with the pictures? It's a parking lot. Come on.
How could you forget Wang?
As far as I know, Wang was not an actor.
They just hired a guy who didn't speak English, gave him a hat, and told him just to laugh.
He's just like, laughing through the whole thing. But Wang was a lot of fun, of course, to dance with.
In truth, Wang was played by a college professor named Dr. Dow, who did speak English.
My name is Dr. Dow. I'm one in the Caddyshack.
At the other end of the experience spectrum was Henry Wilcoxon.
Henry Wilcoxon, who played the bishop, who was 74, 75 years old, who had been in films since the beginning of films, practically.
He'd been in silent movies. And still, I mean, he was in better shape than I was. He's in better shape today than I was then. And he's been dead for years. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Try the veal.
We have Henry Wilcoxon from the Ten Commandments.
It's like unbelievable.
Excellency, fiddlesticks. My name's Fred, and I'm just a man, same as you are.
You're not a man, you're a bishop, for God's sakes!
There is no God.
The casting director didn't have to look far for someone to play the part of Lou Loomis. There was never any doubt the role would go to writer Brian Doyle Murray.
Brian Doyle Murray was Lou Loomis, the caddy master, and he ran a tight ship.
Talk about somebody who's completely believable in that role. I mean, you believe 100% that he's the
caddy master is what those guys are called. And he completely understood the nature of that part.
He was kind of a reality check for me, because he had the movie in his head.
The last main character to come on board was Carl, the assistant greenskeeper.
I'd met Bill when he was a teenager. He was selling hot chestnuts on a street corner across the street from Second City in front of a supermarket. And funny. I mean, no, there could not have been a funnier hot chestnut salesman in the world.
By the time Caddyshack came around, Bill Murray's career had progressed considerably. He was a cast regular and fan favorite on SNL, and had recently starred in Meatballs. His appearance in Caddyshack was supposed to be only a cameo.
Bill Murray came on last, and people didn't know that if he was going to be able to be in the film at all. He was added at the very last second, put into the very last script.
Because of his busy schedule, though, Bill could only be on set for 6 days, which, at the time of casting, seemed fine.
There were no scripted lines for Carl, the assistant greenskeeper, but we recruited Bill, and we had him for 6 days.
I was frightened of Bill Murray because, one, he was a legend already, and two, there was this buzz that he was a little crazy.
With Murray on board, they finally had all the main characters in place. But they had no idea at the time that those casting choices would throw the original plot of the movie, and eventually the entire production, into turmoil. In the summer of 1979, the Caddyshack production team had assembled some high-powered comedic talent, including SNL stars Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, TV icons Ted Knight and Rodney Dangerfield, and a group of eager young actors. Orion Pictures was pleased with the cast, but was concerned about the inexperience of director Harold Ramis and producer Doug Kenny.
Nobody knew what they were doing.
There was a lot of nervousness about saying yes, even with the success of Animal House.
And the budget reflected the studio's concern.
It's fairly cheap under today's standards, but I can't remember exactly what the number was.
It must have cost $15 million, I think, something like that.
The film was made for $7 million, which is nothing.
But Orion was a company that believed in letting filmmakers do their job without a lot of executive interference.
Orion prided itself on being hands-off. We will let the filmmaker make their own movie.
Caddyshack would eventually test their resolve as the shoot began to spin more and more out of control. The first hint of trouble to come came during location scouting.
We wanted an old, rich country club.
The script was based on the Murray brothers' experience caddying at an Illinois country club.
It was all written with Chicago in mind.
It's supposed to be Illinois, so they wanted to find a golf course that did not have palm trees.
Shooting in L.A. definitely wouldn't work. But palm trees weren't the only reason the filmmakers didn't want to be on the West Coast.
We wanted to be as far away from Hollywood as we could be for our own self-protective purposes.
The guys intuitively knew that the further they got away from Los Angeles, the more they could make the film they wanted to make.
But the timing was wrong for a Midwest shoot.
It was shot in the fall and winter. It would be snowing in Chicago. We just couldn't do it.
So they decided to look in Florida.
We wanted to shoot in Florida, but we couldn't find any place because we had to blow some of the golf course up.
Yeah, that was the problem.
It was very hard to find the right place.
Because most people didn't want to do it.
It started to feel like a bad Florida land deal. Because first they were showing us beautiful country clubs and then saying, but they won't let you shoot here.
And they were running out of time. Shooting had to start no later than August in order to make the next summer release date.
It's like when you buy a house, the realtor shows you the one they think you're going to like best last. So finally we come to
Rolling Hills Country Club. It couldn't have been more posh and fabulous.
It was the only one that didn't have palm trees, and so it looked like Chicago.
It just seemed perfect in every way. They were happy to have us. They were going to close down the course as we needed it.
We're at Grand Oaks Country Club in Florida, which used to be Rolling Hills Country Club in Florida, and that's where we shot Caddyshack. These are the stairs that Spalding would have walked down after the banquet scene and walked over to Dr. Beeper's car. And felt a little bit better. And then Rodney would have driven up in his Rolls Royce.
Kid, park my car, get my bags, and put on some weight, will you?
Right through here.
There was, however, one drawback.
We found out we were on the final approach to Fort Lauderdale Airport.
The sensors for, I think, Fort Lauderdale Airport were at the end of the golf course.
There were 75 airplanes a day. And there was condo construction on two sides of the golf course, full-time bulldozers, earth movers, hammering, saws, everything.
When they were talked into using this location, it was on a weekend and there was no construction around and there were no planes.
These are the airplanes I had to live with every day. Every 5 minutes, they're here.
And that was one of John Murray's job. He was like way out in the fairway. When he would spot planes, he'd go, plane.
The constant roar of planes overhead would plague the shoot from start to finish.
Usually you'll put up with it if you're on a location for a day or two. We were there virtually the whole movie.
All the time.
And that was like a nightmare for a first-time director.
Rolling Hills Country Club may have looked like it could have been in Illinois, but when the cast and crew began arriving in early September, it sure didn't feel like it.
Florida in September is very, very hot, very, very humid.
I got off the plane and I had never been in Florida. I thought there were steam jets in the ground. I looked around and like, oh my God, I'm already sweating.
Remember the first day Rodney came onto the set and he was like, ooh, Florida. It's like a sauna with nets.
But the location did have one thing going for it.
There was a motel right on the golf course where all the actors were staying.
Having all those actors living in the hotel and a lot of the crew living right on the course meant you could roll out of bed 5 minutes before you had to be to work.
Living all together in the hotel had another advantage.
The after hours were as important as creating a community of crew and actors as anything.
It was absolutely like camp.
Best party ever.
The parties on the Caddyshack set would indeed become legendary. But not long after arriving in Florida, a few of the cast members decided to leave the hotel and go out to see some local color.
A girlfriend of mine was visiting me.
His girlfriend was Valerie Bertinelli. I'm like, wow, this guy's doing pretty good.
I wanted to go to a club and hear some music and maybe go dancing. And she said, you know what? I'd really like to go to a local club.
So Scott grabs Valerie, Ann Ryerson, and myself.
And we dressed the part. We looked like something out of the Village People. Because here we're all in denims, and we all got the red bandanas.
And we all go to this bar in the middle of a swamp that no one else knows about.
Before we go in the bar, we see this truck, and it's got a gun rack.
With axe handles where rifles should be in the back.
You know what that's for? It's beating people, right? Hey, you sure you want to go in here? Yeah, Scott, let's go in. We all go in, and there's a jukebox which is not playing, and a radio right above it playing country western music.
And I decide I'm going to change the music, just something more to my liking.
And Hamilton goes over to the radio, and he turns it off.
I turn around, and everyone, all the locals in the bar are staring at me like, you're dead.
And Hamilton, all 6'5", turns around, and he says, wait a minute.
Don't worry, everyone. You're going to love Donnie and Marie.
The club erupts, and they start to yell at him.
Then a minute later, a spitball soaked with beer just misses my head.
That was all the local color they needed.
Scott Columbia says, I think it's time for us to leave.
It was a good night had by all.
In late summer 1979, the Caddyshack cast and crew was supposed to be making final preparations to start shooting, but instead, they were making hurricane preparations.
We taped up our windows, bought water, batteries, that whole thing.
But this was Caddyshack. Batteries and bottled water weren't all they bought.
No one was buying wheat or rice, you know. It was all just chips and dip and alcohol.
If you got stuck, unable to go to the liquor store, that would be terrible. So you stock up on alcohol.
So as the storm approached the hotel on the Rolling Hills golf course where the cast and crew were staying, they were ready.
And we masking taped our windows. This is how I learned about hurricanes. Everything I needed to know, I learned on Caddyshack. Weather, you know, drug and alcohol policies.
In a state known for wild hurricane parties, the Caddyshack cast and crew hunkered down in the hotel, did their best to set a new standard.
There was a lot of singing and dancing, and of course there was probably some drugs.
Then we just had a big party that night. We all thought it was cool, because anybody who's not from Florida thinks that a hurricane is cool, you know.
The hurricane itself was a bit of a letdown. But even though it wasn't as bad as predicted, for first-time director Harold Ramis, it was not a good start.
The first floor flooded, and the image that I always remember is that when the water receded, it left a carpet of earthworms. I mean, literally, just the floor was literally crawling.
Now, it didn't hit with full force, but it hit hard enough that it did destroy some of the sets.
Shooting was delayed while the sets were repaired and the golf course was cleaned up.
But I developed a mantra on Caddyshack, which was, it's not my money. If the whole thing blew away, well, it's not my fault.
Harold is laid back. He's very easygoing. And he does not hardly ever get flustered or angry. I'm not sure that I ever saw him get mad at anybody.
Harold's calm demeanor would serve him well throughout the shoot, as the chaos around him continued to build.
Harold was sweet and kind and driving that crazy bus.
Harold Ramis was probably the most adult of anyone.
Harold does kind of sound like he's like Barney's illegitimate son, doesn't he, you know?
Hi, I'm Harold Ramis.
Hi, I'm Harold Ramis.
And my dad's a dinosaur on Sesame Street. How you doing?
His calm and friendly persona did not, however, make up for his lack of experience.
I think Harold wasn't even sure which end of the lens to look through, to tell you the truth.
Well, it was a little disconcerting the first day when I came onto the set and Harold was looking in the lens towards the eyepiece, thinking that you could see the scene through the eyepiece.
Not true. The Chevy might have said that. I don't know. Not true at all.
It's not true. That didn't really happen.
Very first shot, they said, where do you want to put the camera? And I look around, we're on a golf course, it's all trees and grass. I figure, well, one direction's as good as another. I said, well, let's look this way. And the first assistant director looked and said, so you want us to move the generator and all the trucks and the catering tent and the makeup trailers and all the star trailers? Was that what that stuff is? All right, no, let's not do that.
Harold may not have known where to put the camera, but experienced cinematographer Steve Larner, who'd recently finished shooting Badlands and the Buddy Holly story, did.
It was his special enjoyment to work with first-time directors. He was like a natural teacher.
There is a general philosophy in Hollywood. If you have a first-time director, we surround him or her with pros.
And everyone looked at me like I was an idiot, but I thought, all right, next time I learned my lesson, and I said, where do you think we should put the camera? And it was easy.
Director Harold Ramis wasn't the only one on the set with minimal movie experience.
There were a lot of firsts on the movie. It was Rodney Dangerfield's first big feature.
Remember how Rodney, when you saw him on camera, would tug on his collar, you know, very nervous. And he was sitting just with me at lunch going, sweating, tugging, going, am I okay? Am I okay? This is my first movie.
The most endearing thing about Rodney was that he was clueless about how to make movies.
He had never been in a movie.
Everybody remembers Rodney's first scene.
I was on the set the day that Rodney did his first scene, and there was a kind of a three-quarter return wall that looked as if it could be a door, and so Rodney was hiding behind that.
So I had worked with him the night before on the upcoming scene, and we got everything set and had it all right.
So they rolled and, you know, clapped it, and then Harold said, action.
Action, Rodney?
And Rodney goes, yeah. When I say action, you know, you can come on out.
He goes, oh, you want me to do the bit? I said, yeah, do the bit.
You know, and then he comes running out.
Hey, kid, I'm Al Chervik. I'm playing with Drew Scott today. This is my guest, Mr. Wang. No offense.
He didn't even know what action meant. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of priceless.
As soon as the cameras are off, he's like, oh, that was horrible. How am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing.
I suck. I suck. What do you mean? What do you mean? He said, I suck. Nobody's laughing.
If he didn't laugh at his shtick or whatever he's doing, he took it very personally.
I said, Rodney, no, that's not the point. They can't laugh because if they laugh, they can't use it on the soundtrack.
Oh, somebody stepping a duck.
Shooting a movie may have taken some getting used to, but Rodney instantly endeared himself to cast and crew alike, especially the young caddies.
Rodney liked to party.
Anything with Rodney was fun.
He was one of the people that I felt most comfortable with because he had worse self-esteem than I did. I went to see another doctor, psychiatrist. He told me I was crazy. I said, hey, I want a second opinion. He said, okay, you're ugly, too.
He'd, like, stare at you, like, get your reaction. You didn't think that was funny. Why wasn't that funny?
So he tells us this, and we're hysterical. And the whole time we're laughing, he's going, you really think it's funny? You really think it's funny?
I tell you, the day I was born, I got no respect. The doctor told my mother I did all I could, but he pulled through anyway.
As Rodney's oversized persona began to emerge on the dailies, the script began to change to take advantage of it.
Well, Rodney had an incredibly successful stand-up comedy act. He told 200 or 300 jokes in a row that he'd memorized, and there was not an extra word or syllable in those jokes. They were really tightly crafted one-liners, and he wanted his movie dialogue to be that tight.
And my kid, that's another one. He's full of smart answers. Well, the other day I told him about the birds and the bees. He told me about my wife and a butcher.
He was constantly trying new material. He'd come to Harold every day on the set. I got a new one. Hey, you get a hat with that? You get a free bowl of soup. I was like, that's great. Is you sure? Yeah.
A lot of times I had the punchline at the end. It'd always be gone. And he'd walk away with the scene.
You know, they say for Italians, this is skilled labor, you know that?
No, actually, I'm a rich millionaire. You see, my doctor told me to get out and carry golf bags a couple of times a week.
Hey, you're a funny kid, you know? Yeah, what time you do back in Boys Town?
And I wasn't about to get into a comic pissing war with Rodney Dangerfield because he would have wiped the floor with me.
No one will ever accuse Rodney Dangerfield of having been a great actor, but it's like a force of nature watching him on the screen.
Hey, just give someone else a chance, huh, you lucky devil? Come here, honey. Hey, loosen up, will you? You're a lot of woman, you know that? Hey, you want to make $14 the hard way?
In the summer of 1979, filming of Caddyshack was well underway in Davie, Florida, and so was the party.
If you say you remember Caddyshack, you probably weren't there.
We were really having a good time.
It could just be, you know, it could be the drugs, I'm not sure.
And the attitude on the set was just as relaxed. The script was being all but abandoned as the actors improvised more and more of their scenes.
Hey, Mr. Webb, can I ask you something?
Sure thing. Shoot, Timmy.
Danny.
Danny.
Michael O'Keefe's first scene with Chevy was almost entirely improvised.
They put the camera at the bottom of this hill, and then Chevy and I kind of walked down towards it, and we had to time it so that we were finished just as we walked off camera.
You take drugs, Danny?
Every day.
Good. So what's the problem?
You really never knew what he was going to say or what was going to happen, so you had to kind of like be loose and open and aware.
With Chevy, even the slightest suggestion from director Harold Ramis could trigger a comedy classic.
I think I suggested that he make some kind of spiritual sound.
I play golf now, so we use that still. It's so crazy.
Chevy and I had a good relationship, and I could just suggest stuff to him, and he would do it right away.
For Cindy Morgan, however, Chevy's improvisational style took some getting used to.
When Chevy spills that bottle of oil on my back, do you think I know that was coming?
Uh-oh, now I've done it. Get that away from you. Oh, I'm sorry. It's like reaching under the rug, isn't it? There we are.
Crazy.
Their scenes together were often tense. But while shooting the apartment scene, things blew up into an all-out war.
Chevy and I were doing the love scene. It was hot. We'd been working for 2 days. One of us had said something. The other one of us had said something. One of us walked. The other one wouldn't apologize.
Harold eventually convinced the two warring parties to finish the scene.
I was getting my makeup touched up. And Harold said, come over here and sit down. And if you watch that scene again, you'll see me sit down and watch my eyes at some point. And, you know, I'm looking at the tequila, and I take a shot, and I see him snort the salt, and I look up, and the camera light's on.
I guess I would sometimes forget to bring everyone else up to speed. Oh, yeah, Chevy's going to snort salt.
And I went, son of a gun, this is in the movie.
I was born to love you. I was born to lick your face.
I went, all right, it's in the movie, I gotcha. And it was wonderful, just following. The best part was just reacting to him.
She went with everything. She was game, and that's what you look for, is someone who will roll with it.
As shooting continued, rumors about another big star began making their way around the set.
We kept thinking, is he coming? Is he coming?
Bill Murray was scheduled to be on set for only 6 days, but no one was entirely sure when he'd arrive or what would happen when he did.
And suddenly we see this golf cart coming from the distance with a bunch of kids in it, and as it approaches, Bill Murray stands and goes, which way to the youth hostel?
One of the first scenes Murray shot was the Dalai Lama scene.
Bill had the basis of a great speech from Brian, and then he started embellishing, and the embellishments were hysterical. I was out there throwing suggestions in, and I said, you know, what if the Dalai Lama stiffs him, you know? So he improvised the whole closing beat.
And I said, hey, Lama, how about a little something for the effort, you know?
I got that going for me, which is nice. Is probably one of the most quoted lines.
Caddyshack is full of hilarious Bill Murray quotes. All the more remarkable, since in the original script, he had no lines.
It's really a tribute to Bill. Maybe one of the most famous comedy improvs ever is the Cinderella story.
I happened to be walking by when they were about to shoot that, and Harold said, come here, you're not going to believe this. And I was like, what? He said, just watch.
All the script said was that Carl was cutting off the tops of flowers with a grass whip.
I'd been jogging, and to keep my spirits up, I would be the announcer at the end of the marathon. Oh, you know, the runners are coming into the stadium. It's Ramus in the lead, you know, and I would keep it seemed funny to me. So I said to Bill, I said, do you ever, when you're playing a sport, like pretend you're also the announcer? He goes, he said, say no more.
Young greenskeeper, Garth Speckler, U.S. Open. She's got about 320 yards. She's going to punch an 8-iron up there. You know, and he started doing this whole thing, and he had just written it right then and there.
Cinderella story. Out of nowhere, a former greenskeeper.
As shooting continued, the character of Carl the assistant greenskeeper was expanding. Caddyshack was originally conceived as a coming-of-age story about caddies at an upscale country club. But as Rodney Dangerfield, Chevy Chase, and Bill Murray continued to improvise, the shoot was becoming more and more unpredictable, and the entire focus of the film began to shift.
It just shifted the whole weight of the movie. It unbalanced it in terms of telling a coming-of-age story.
And as their roles got bigger, the roles of the caddies had to get smaller.
I think it ended up making it more like a Marx Brothers movie. It had all the shape of an early Marx Brothers film. You had like a high society, snooty people played by Ted Knight and Lois Kibbe. In the Marx Brothers, it was always Sig Ruman and Margaret Dumont. And then I thought, all right, Rodney's like our Groucho, and Bill's like our Harpo, and Chevy's like Chico, you know, and it had that shape.
As the dailies arrived in Hollywood, the producers at Orion thought the footage was hilarious. But it wasn't exactly what they had signed off on.
I was frightened to death that it wouldn't cut together because you had a bunch of lunatics shooting and being funny.
Caddyshack was like a daycare center with no babysitters.
We were all teenagers, for the record.
Still, true to their word, Orion remained mostly hands-off. But they did have one suggestion.
I said, wait, we have the two biggest comedy stars in the world, and they don't talk to each other.
So Doug and I and Brian sat down and created a moment, a climactic moment. I told the set decorators to create a little apartment for Bill in the back of a shed with an old car seat for a sofa and just throw a blanket over it, I said, and get a big wooden wire spool for a coffee table. While they were doing the set, we had lunch and we laid out the scene beat by beat. You know, what happened, Chevy walks in and what they talk about, and that Bill is studying greenskeeping. He wants to move up in the world.
The plan was to shoot it that afternoon, but rumors swirled on the set that Chevy and Bill were feuding. Shooting this new scene meant they'd have to work together, something they hadn't signed up for.
Chevy came back to host Saturday night. There'd been an actual physical scuffle in the hallway. I didn't know the details. I didn't know if punches were thrown or if it was a wrestling match, but I knew there'd been a fight in the hallway.
There was a lot of tension because of the Chevy chase. Bill Murray reported history.
Billy Murray is a very provocative guy. I mean, he's streets of Chicago. These are tough kids. They can fight.
Chevy and Billy, they were at war.
When it came time to shoot the scene, no one knew what to expect.
For me, it felt like two heavyweight boxers getting ready to go into the ring who, you know, had some history, and it was what's going to happen.
Chevy was so insecure in those days. I think he needed to show how good he was, even though he was a natural. But I think Billy, it was like an athletic competition. It was like a golf match.
The showdown between Bill and Chevy, however, never materialized.
They were absolute professionals and never displayed any sign of prior problems.
The scene with Bill and Chevy was hysterical because you didn't know what was coming next, and neither did they.
And then they just improvised, and some of the stuff is so funny.
We have a pond in the back. We have a pool and a pond. A pond would be good for you.
Harold was brilliant at getting into Chevy's head and Bill's head and making it clear to them what was working, what wasn't working, and kind of culling the improvisatory stuff that they were bringing to the film and refining it.
We shot, I think, for a day, and we got the scene in the you know, a little bit, you know, in the shack, in the golf shack.
In just 6 days on the set, Bill Murray turned the minor role of Carl the assistant greenskeeper into a major character. Every time the cameras rolled on him, he did something brilliant.
He could make something out of nothing.
All totally improvised, you know, just like let the camera roll.
I think that Bill's character was an invention from himself. I watched it evolve as he created it.
Bill Murray working with the clay figures, doing all the voices.
How do you get away with that voice, you know?
And I sat there utterly in awe that he was just coming up with this stuff.
It's like not many people could do that.
Bam! And nobody knew that was coming. My God, he's a savage.
I mean, you've got to admit that one of the funniest moments in that entire movie is when Bill Murray picks up the candy bar and says, "It's not so bad."
Shooting the infamous pool scene was one of the most memorable for the cast. It was one of the few scenes not shot at Rolling Hills Country Club.
I remember before I had to walk out for their first shot, where I had to walk past the pool, and I had to pull this character off. And I remember standing there leaning on the sink going, I can't do this. I just can't. This isn't me.
And I think I had a line when she passed. I said, don't even bother to say the line. She's gonna steal the shot. You know, just turn, look at her, and lick your lips, because whatever line you got, just that walk is gonna, you know.
I walked out and I walked past the pool and I saw these guys sucking in their gut and I went, all right, they're buying it.
But it was the caddies' turn to shine in the classic water ballet scene. The pool where the scene was shot is long gone, but for the people there that legendary day, the memories are still fresh.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm in the movie Caddyshack, and I'm in the blue T-shirt in the pool scene. It was really grueling, getting second-degree sunburn, sitting out here roasting in August.
The first thing they did was the high dive.
Hi, I'm Marcus. I played the lifeguard in Caddyshack. I did my casting call. All they did is they wanted me to say, hey, you put on your suit.
You put your suit on!
You shave your ass! For me, it was difficult. I had to walk across there, my first shot on the film, climb the ladder and do the dive. I can float. I can swim from here to there, but I'm not a swimmer. I'm certainly not a diver. I'm legally blind, so I climbed up the board without my lenses in, and I had to walk it like I meant business and take the spring, and they could cut to the real diver.
And things got really crazy once the caddies hit the water.
We staged a water ballet, which was kind of impromptu and took a lot of the day just getting that right.
Harold just said, we should really do it like a Busby Berkeley thing.
Some of us nearly drowned during the water ballet. At first, they didn't realize that we couldn't hear cuts, so we would just keep going upside down underwater till people started to float to the top. And I thought, we really need a signal.
It had nothing to do with the movie, but we knew it was leading to the big joke, the candy bar joke, which was going to save us no matter what we did.
This is a Baby Ruth candy bar.
This is now a classic candy bar.
I take off the wrapper. I'm talking this way.
Oh, give me some.
Who asked you?
Come on, I'm in.
I didn't
Joey,
ask you.
please.
Get out.
And of course, the person in the pool thinks it's duty.
Don't touch it.
It took me like 15 takes to do that one stupid scene. Come on, more. I was like, duty! Duty! More. Duty! Like, to get a real big duty out of me. Oh, I hope you don't use that.
Carl was right. It is very tasty.
Duty!
In the late summer of 1979, Rolling Hills Country Club in Davie, Florida, had been overrun by the cast and crew of Caddyshack. By day, they were hard at work filming scenes that would eventually become comedy classics. By night, they were partying just as hard, if not harder.
We did have a lot of fun, you know, and probably too much fun.
Rumors of rampant drug and alcohol abuse on the Florida shoot eventually made it back to Mike Medavoy at Orion.
Hey, what kind of is this?
It's the best, man. I got it from a Negro. You're probably so high already you don't even know it.
It's been said before, so I'm not sort of violating any secrets here, that it was quite a party, the making of Caddyshack.
We got a call from Mike Medavoy, who was concerned that there was too much drugs on the set.
Some thought Rusty Lemarand may have been the source of those rumors. He'd been hired on the film by Medavoy personally.
What wasn't clear to me at the time is that I would be a spy, that I would be somebody who would provide Mike with ongoing information as to what was going on.
However, word got back to Medavoy. It was up to John Peters to make things right.
I was the lion tamer. I was the guy that could come in and say, hey, guys, you know, please, can we shoot tomorrow at the same time, please, you know? Because, you know, sometimes 10 o'clock in the morning, everybody would be sound asleep. It was a looser time.
In truth, the loose atmosphere had begun to take its toll on the production. Scenes were taking longer to shoot because of late arrivals and no-shows. And there were numerous problems caused by the tension that had developed between the younger actors and the older ones, especially Ted Knight.
He was Ted, you know, he took things seriously.
He thought everyone was stoned all the time and that they didn't understand him and he didn't understand them. And it started to make him a little bit paranoid.
Danny, I think you know why you're here, so I'll do us both the courtesy of not reviewing what happened yesterday. Sorry.
I mean, if I was his age, I wouldn't be hanging around with a bunch of 20-year-olds that were spinning donuts in golf carts on the golf course at 2 o'clock in the morning under the influence of controlled substances. That doesn't sound like a good time to me.
The most important decision you can make right now is what do you stand for, Danny? Goodness or badness?
You know, you could land planes on Ted's hair. You know, it looked like an aircraft carrier.
There was always a comb handy, and he knew how to use it. Oh, yeah.
It was this fantastic construction. And when Chevy delivered that Judge Schmelz, you know, my father never liked you line, he reached over and he kind of mussed Ted's hair. Well, that did not go over. Because, you know, Ted would be like, you know, that kind of thing. And Chevy would be like, what's the problem?
There was conflict with John, between John and particularly Doug Kenny.
Doug Kenny was a very nice, you know, quiet man, but he could be very volatile.
On one particular visit to Florida, Peters railed against the loose atmosphere and unprofessional behavior on the set.
Doug just said, when you come back again, you better come back with a different attitude or just don't come back at all.
But the legendary producer's influence on the movie wasn't all so contentious.
John was a bear. He fought for us every step of the way. I'm not sure we could have done what we did without John defending us.
He stayed out of the picture for the most part, but when he inserted himself, he was very clear and very specific and usually right.
I pretty much could protect the boys, the artists, the creative guys, and make everything okay.
Principal photography on Caddyshack ended in Florida on October 1st, 1979. Exhausted from over 2 months of nonstop working and partying, for most, the end was anticlimactic.
We were also hungover from 8 weeks of partying and filmmaking. The wrap party was like, oh man, this is a great experience. This is really good. All right, let's stay in touch.
I also knew after this shoot is over, I'm going to need a good long rest. And I slept until noon for about a month.
Director Harold Ramis, on the other hand, had remained relatively sober throughout the shoot.
Harold checked out every night at the end of the shoot, went to his room, did his homework. He did not participate in this kind of bacchanal.
The wrap party was his chance to catch up.
I remember a wrap party that I got so intoxicated I had to be carried home, and early, too. So it's like, I missed the whole wrap party. It was kind of strange.
In truth, things were far from wrapped for Ramis and producer Doug Kenney. When they got back to Hollywood and began to assemble a rough cut of the movie, it became apparent they still had a lot of work to do.
It's a famous saying, you're never so happy as when you see your dailies. You're never so unhappy as you are when you see your first rough cut.
It was difficult because we had so much funny stuff coming in as we shot the movie.
There was quite a bit of footage on this film. My first cut was 4.5 hours.
Editing was a disaster. We had a young editor, Bill Carruth, wonderful guy. And we just all he listened to everything we said, which was a big mistake.
Billy playing with the golf ball washer, that scene could have gone on for a half hour. And I think at one point it did.
We had so much material and so many jokes and so many funny things and a story to tell. I think the film just turned into spaghetti.
It would be, well, let's try this. We'd take this out, put that back in.
John and Mark and I said, we've got to do something. We can't show this to Orion. We'll all be fired. We have to fix this film, and none of us have the skills to do it.
When the movie was cut together, it didn't cut together.
So they kept cutting scenes to get it down to a more manageable length. But as those scenes disappeared, much of the original plot disappeared along with them.
The scenes with Danny and Maggie just didn't play.
Well, that's it then. We'll just get married.
Oh, God, that's all I need.
As each cut got shorter and shorter, her scenes were disappearing. It was a skeleton without a spine. What basically remained was a series of wonderful vignettes, but it didn't have that through line.
Enter the gopher.
We didn't realize at the time that the gopher could be a central, pivotal thread that moved the comedy and the humor and the drama throughout the piece.
The filmmakers began to wonder if the battle between Bill Murray and the gopher could provide the dramatic through line that had been lost when the caddy scenes were cut. There was, however, one problem.
During the shooting of the film, principal photography, there was only one scene in which the gopher appeared.
The gopher was originally a hand puppet, and Trevor Albert, our assistant, he was the gopher.
They pointed to a hole in the ground behind a sand trap and said, all right, you got to get in there, and you take this puppet and put it on the end of your hand, and when Rodney yells, that gopher's, or what does he say?
That kangaroo stole my ball.
You know, you pull the puppet back down the hole, and so that was me. So I was a gopher, and I was a gopher.
And Rodney Dangerfield is fighting with basically a sock puppet.
I wanted to be working on Truffaut movies, and here I am with a, gopher on the end of my hand. Yeah.
But now they were talking about making the gopher a main character. A sock puppet wouldn't cut it.
I mean, it was just A puppet? Think about it.
John Peters said, I'll go dig up more money. We got to see the gopher underground.
We auditioned live animals for the gopher. They brought in every kind of rodent that was trainable or usable. And they kept trying to sell us on the idea of a ferret. Why not have an animated creature that has life in the film, especially if it was hip and funny? So the job went to John Dykstra.
Somebody called me one day and said, can you build a gopher?
Special effects whiz kid John Dykstra had recently won 2 Oscars for his work on Star Wars.
It had to have the ability to make anthropomorphic kinds of expressions, smiling, frowning, confusion, surprise.
He needed to be able to spit water, cough, smoke.
And he had to be physically adept, be able to dance and to move around.
I determined early that the ears gave the most expression, right? That you could, curiosity, anger, what's going on over here, there. And that by changing the profile of the head, I could get a lot of emotion. And then I also wired it so that he could snarl to the left or snarl to the right or, bare his teeth entirely.
It's a gopher world, and we're just living in it.
They created all this wonderful world of the gopher. And at first I thought, oh man, this is, they're polluting my work of art here somehow with this animation. But it turned out to be funny.
Not everyone agreed, however.
Doug was outraged by the gopher and didn't want the gopher in the movie. And he was, he's furious that John Peters had suggested the gopher and they were spending all this money on the gopher.
In fact, by then, Doug Kenney was becoming disillusioned with the whole movie-making process.
During the editing process, the movie in some ways got taken away from him. They brought in a new editor. And I think Doug at this point was just like, no way.
He wanted a much more intellectual film. He wanted a much, more interpersonally sensitive film. I think Danny's tale was far more important to him, definitely, than the gopher's tale.
Except for Doug Kenney, nearly everyone agreed the new scenes with the gopher provided the spine the movie needed. And it did something else, too.
It kind of let everyone off the hook by saying, all right, this film is really silly. There's an animated dancing gopher in the opening of this film. What could go wrong after that? I mean...
Now all they needed was some music for him to dance to.
When John Peters said, all right, who should do the music for the movie? And Doug and I looked at each other, and one of us said, I don't know, Pink Floyd. And John turns and yells at his assistant, Hillary, get Pink Floyd on the phone.
We talked to a lot of different people about scoring the movie. Of course, nobody knew much about Caddyshack at the time. But Kenny Loggins was someone who I loved.
My name is Kenny Loggins, and I wrote I'm All Right for Caddyshack. I stopped in at the screening room and saw a rough cut. It didn't have an ending when I saw it. But I laughed my ass off and went, this is really a funny movie. I want to have something to do with it.
And he came in and he wrote I'm All Right.
Why you give me a fight? Why don't you just let me be?
I'm all right. Everyone think about it. Yeah, I'm all right.
It didn't hurt having a really good Kenny Loggins song to start the movie.
The gopher's my best friend now. We sell him at concerts. Don't get moving. And then, it goes on from there.
For the rest of the music, they brought in veteran composer Johnny Mandel.
Johnny Mandel had written the score for MASH. And I remember when he was working up the music for the film, he'd say, all right, I want to, play you something. And he'd sit down at a piano and he'd start, here's the love theme. And then the strings come in. And he'd sing the strings and then horns. I'm going, well, that tells me nothing. What can I tell from this?
When everything blows up, and that was fun because I was able to do the 1812 overture with the bong gong 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 bong, bong 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 bong.
It may have been fun for Johnny Mandel, but when the scene was originally shot, it was anything but.
We wanted to blow up the green, but of course the golf course didn't want us to blow up one of their greens.
Real golfers don't like their golf course blown up that much.
And we had to convince these people to blow up their course. They said no. We created a party, sent them to the party. They went to the party, and while they were there, they saw on the news that their golf course was being blown up.
But it's true. That's how John is. He came up with that idea. Well, let's buy them dinner, then they'll let us blow up their course.
I remember the day that I walked over and said, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we're building a fake
golf mound. I still don't know anything about golf. What are they called? Golf hills?
So in the space between two fairways, they built an artificial green.
They came back, we left, they called the police, they made a file a report, but we gave them money and it was good and it went away. I may have made all this up, I don't remember.
There was a lot of extras around, and Harold got on the megaphone and said, "We can only do this once." So he said, "It's very important that you're focusing on the ball." And all of a sudden, this thing exploded with such incredible force.
They put too much explosive in there.
And we felt the hot air coming toward you.
It must have been like Apocalypse Now, where they're going to destroy the entire village.
It was a Golfalypse Now.
I remember thinking, oh, that's cool.
The nearby Fort Lauderdale airport didn't think it was so cool. An incoming pilot allegedly reported the golf course explosion as a plane crash.
And Harold was like, "What are you? You know, you didn't react to the explosions. What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I was reacting to the putt. You know, I needed to win the match and get the. Oh man, we just blew up half the town. You know, and you didn't even blink an eye." I was like, "Yeah, what can I tell you? I was worried about the ball going in the hole."
Except for Michael O'Keefe, the explosive end to Caddyshack certainly got the attention of everyone within miles of it. But now, as the producers and studio readied the film for release, the question was, would Caddyshack get the attention of the movie-going public? Caddyshack hit theaters on July 25th, 1980, almost 2 months later than the planned release date. By then, Doug Kenney had had enough of Hollywood.
He just had a hard time, I think, assimilating into the Hollywood thing.
Caddyshack wasn't under his control. It wasn't the film he wanted.
After the premiere, critics were not kind.
How did the critics like Caddyshack? They hated it.
I remember the New York Times called the film an amiable mess.
The reviews for Caddyshack stunk. You should go back and look at Gene Shalit's review on the Today Show. Do you remember him? He's a film critic.
Caddyshack is not about the Mikado's daughter-in-law elect. It's about as rotten a movie as has slopped the screen this summer.
And he just dissed the film.
This time, Chevy Chase and the wearisome Bill Murray waste our time in a sketchy bramble of golfers, caddies, and country clubs. Even worse than Murray is Ted Knight. He is truly awful. Caddyshack is a hazard, and those who pay to see it may be teed off.
What's gratifying about it is, now it's 30 years later, and, Caddyshack is Caddyshack, and Gene Shalit's Gene Shalit,
Even so, Caddyshack did not live up to the high bar the success of Animal House had set.
It wasn't Animal House, and that's what people were hoping for or expecting from us.
The cast and crew of Caddyshack felt the sting of professional disappointment in the wake of the generally poor reviews the movie received. Just 2 months later, though, they were struck even harder by a personal tragedy. On August 27th, Doug Kenney's body was found at the bottom of a cliff in Hawaii.
Doug never got to see the film be a success. He got to see the premiere, he got to see the bad review in the LA Times, and a few days later, he was gone.
People say, that it was the failure of Caddyshack that pushed him over the edge, but that wasn't true. I mean, he was pretty depressed anyway.
I was in the office with John when we got the news. He said, he must have thought he could fly.
Doug was a genius, and like a lot of comic geniuses, he was sort of tortured, too.
He just knew how to be funny, but more important, Doug Kenney knew how to be a human being.
He had a tendency to make you feel special.
I loved him completely, and, it was, it sort of woke everybody up. And Doug was the first to go. The next year, John Belushi died. So it was like a wake-up call for all of us to start looking at our lifestyles and, figure out who we were and who we wanted to be. And, is this good? Is this, should anyone be living this way?
But the tapestry of that film includes many, many fibers created and woven by Doug Kenney and would be utterly different without Doug's contribution.
At the point where he died, he really had not quite seen the fruits of Caddyshack because I think it grew and grew and grew in popularity, and I regret that for him.
Caddyshack has indeed grown in popularity over the years.
I'm having a little party at the yacht club this Sunday. I'm christening my new sloop. What are you doing this Sunday? No plans? Great. How'd you like to mow my lawn?
Although no one can quite put their finger on why.
Well, if anybody really knew the answer to why Caddyshack worked, there'd be a path beaten to their door. Why did Caddyshack work? Please tell me.
Much of the cast and crew of Caddyshack is still making people laugh. Chevy Chase and Bill Murray went on to become two of the biggest comedy stars in Hollywood. And Harold Ramis, having gone on to write and star in Stripes and Ghostbusters, and direct Groundhog Day, as well as many others, has inspired a whole new generation of comedy writers and directors.
Harold Ramis was the forerunner to Judd Apatow, and he still is. I think Judd will say that.
Michael O'Keefe went on to appear in countless films and TV shows. Most recently, opposite George Clooney in Michael Clayton. He's also become a Zen priest.
You know, Doug was the one who turned me on to Zen a little bit, and he turned me on to Basho.
The Zen philosopher Basho once wrote, "A flute with no holes is not a flute, and a donut with no hole is a Danish."
Scott Columbia hit box office gold with the Porky's movies and is now an acting coach and musician in California. Following Caddyshack, Cindy Morgan starred in the sci-fi hit Tron. It was her last big film role. She now lives in Florida and is writing a book on her Caddyshack experience.
When I walk away from here, I'm going to wash off this makeup, my hair goes back in a ponytail, and I'll be running on the beach and writing the book.
Rodney Dangerfield continued his successful career as a stand-up comedian and went on to write and star in Back to School with Harold Ramis. He made many more film and television appearances until he died in 2004. Ted Knight went back on TV as the star of the hit series Too Close for Comfort until his death from cancer in 1986. Despite the movie's dancing gophers, unabashed silliness, and cheesy special effects, Caddyshack remains a timeless classic. And unlike most movies, which tend to fade away over the years, Caddyshack somehow manages to get better.
And when it went on television, it had 2 stars in the TV Guide.
But as time has gone on, I think Caddyshack has just gained and gained and gained.
10 years after that, I looked and it had 3 stars. And I thought, well, it's like a fine wine. It's just apparently getting better the longer you leave it in the can.
And it's the kind of thing that dads actually pass to their kids, who pass to their kids.
We're all linked together. There's 30th anniversaries, there's bar mitzvahs, there's brisks, there's this, there's that. There's every kind of thing. It's like it's been born 25 times.
This movie is so important to so many people. You can't have a conversation without somebody bringing it up.
And not only will they bring it up, they'll know all the lines.
Hey, freeze, golfer.
I enjoy skinny skiing,
I want a hamburger, no a cheeseburger.
going to bullfights on acid.
I have to laugh.
I want a hot dog, I want french fries.
Noonin. Noonin.
Double turds.
I was really tired of having fun all the time.
I ain't gonna pay no 50 cents for no Coke.
Eliu, could you loofah my stretch marks?
You want to tie me up with some of your ties? Tie?
And I got that going for me, which is nice.
The thing I hear most from men who want to meet Lacey Underall is they'll look at me and say, you were my first, and they never quite finish the sentence. But I know what they mean.
Until 300, no matter what I was involved with, including Batman, the only thing that any guy would care about, it didn't matter any movie I was involved with or greenlit or made at the studios or produced, it was always about, wow, dude, you did Caddyshack.
Memories of the missteps, the mayhem, the utter chaos behind the scenes have long since faded as Caddyshack has taken its place among Hollywood's classic comedies. And that's something the cast and crew are often reminded of, even all these years later.
I was making a television pilot, and the wardrobe designer came up to me and said she was a big Caddyshack fan. And she could tell that I wasn't, like, thrilled that she had mentioned that. And She then said, you know, the reason I mentioned that was because my father was a big Caddyshack fan when it first came out, and he died recently, and he was in the hospital with leukemia. And one of the only times he relaxed when he was in the hospital was when we would put Caddyshack on, and we would sit around and watch Caddyshack with my dad while he was dying. And, you know, that kind of gave it some significance for me. It may not be the most artistic film ever made, but there is something to be said for making people laugh.
When we got the go-ahead to make this film, Doug said to me, "You are going to have the best time of your life." And he was right.
I'm alright, nobody worry about me. You got me back, why don't you just let me be? I'm alright, nobody